Living alone outside Tonopah had never felt lonely in a sentimental way. The desert does not invite reflection. It presses in with heat during the day and cold at night, stripping thought down to function. The trailer sat a mile off the highway on packed caliche, tilted slightly toward the west from a long-ago leveling mistake. A few rusted vehicles marked other properties across the flats, distant enough to feel abandoned even when occupied. Wind moved freely out there, carrying dust, the smell of creosote, and sometimes the low mechanical hum from the mines south of town. Nights stayed quiet in a way that felt permanent, like sound itself had been thinned by distance. Sleep usually came hard but stayed deep once it settled. A routine kept things steady. Doors locked before sunset. Windows covered with foil-backed insulation to keep the heat out. A single porch light left on, more habit than need. No visitors came after dark. That was understood without discussion. People in that part of Nevada minded their own business or left. The first knock happened at 3:03 in the morning. The time stood out later, not in the moment. At first there was only the sound, gentle and measured, not the hollow bang of a fist but the careful contact of knuckles against metal. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. The kind of knocking used at a front desk or an office door. It reached the bed through the thin walls, clear but restrained. Awakening came fast, heart already working, body alert in a way sleep never allows during normal dreams. The trailer settled with its usual creaks. Wind moved around the corners. The porch light cast a dull yellow strip across the gravel. Nothing else made noise. Lying still felt reasonable. The desert had a way of amplifying small sounds. Coyotes scratched at doors sometimes. Drunks wandered from the highway on rare occasions. Anyone with sense did not open a door in the middle of the night without reason. Silence returned after a minute. Breathing slowed. Sleep came back in pieces. Morning brought no sign of disturbance. The gravel lay smooth except for the tire tracks left from the previous afternoon. The door showed no damage. Locks worked as they always had. Coffee tasted normal. The knock became a footnote, something easy to dismiss once daylight returned. The second night followed the same rhythm until the same interruption. Again at 3:03. The digital clock glowed green on the nightstand, numbers sharp and unmistakable. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. The exact same pattern. The exact same pressure. That detail pressed harder than the sound itself. Animals do not knock politely. Neither do drunk strangers. Remaining still felt less reasonable this time. Listening took effort. The desert offered nothing beyond the knock and the low hum of electricity from the trailer's aging system. No footsteps. No breathing. No shifting weight on the porch. The idea of checking the window crossed the mind and stayed there. The front window sat beside the door, its view limited by the angle of the trailer and the insulation panels taped around the frame. Pulling one back would expose a narrow slice of porch. Doing so would also make movement obvious from outside. Remaining unseen felt important. The knocking stopped again. Sleep came late and thin, filled with half-dreams about alarms and unfinished tasks. Morning arrived with tension already settled into the muscles. Daylight inspection showed nothing new. No footprints. No marks. The porch boards held the same weathered cracks. The latch sat firm. No one from town mentioned unusual activity. Tonopah ran on routine. News traveled fast there, and nothing had traveled at all. Carl crossed the mind more than once that day. The trailer across the flats had sat dark since the accident. Everyone knew about the rollover. The curve on Route 6 had claimed more than one driver. Carl's truck had left the road at speed, rolled twice, and come to rest upside down in a wash. The coroner ruled it fast and final. A closed casket. No visitors to the site since the sheriff removed the vehicle. Carl had been quiet but friendly, the sort of neighbor who waved and kept conversations short. Occasional help with repairs. A borrowed tool returned clean. No family nearby. No one to clear the place out yet. The third night arrived heavy with expectation. Sleep came early from exhaustion rather than peace. The clock changed from 3:02 to 3:03 with a soft electronic blink. The knock followed immediately, precise enough to feel intentional. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Remaining still felt impossible. The sound landed too close, too controlled. Breathing stayed shallow. Listening stretched long seconds into something brittle. Movement toward the window happened without planning. The insulation peeled back with care, adhesive resisting with a faint tearing sound that seemed loud enough to give everything away. The gap revealed the porch in a narrow vertical strip. Carl stood there. The face looked wrong before recognition even settled. The posture matched memory. The jacket matched too, the brown canvas one worn during cold mornings. The hair sat flat against the head, combed the same way it always had been. The smile did not belong. It spread wider than it should have, pulling the skin tight along the cheeks, exposing too much teeth. The eyes stayed open too long without blinking. No sound came from outside. No knocking followed. The figure stood still, angled toward the door, head tilted slightly as if listening for movement within. The accident photos had circulated quietly through town. Someone always leaked those things. Carl's face had not looked like that afterward. Swelling, blood, bruising. What stood on the porch showed none of it. The skin appeared intact. Too intact. The smile widened further, stretching past familiarity into something strained and practiced, as if held in place by effort rather than emotion. The muscles around the mouth quivered. Backing away from the window happened slowly, insulation falling back into place. The door stayed between the body and whatever stood outside. The lock felt thin under the hand. The deadbolt seemed inadequate despite having worked for years. The knocking did not resume. Time passed without markers. The clock no longer mattered. Standing there listening became the only task. Morning came with pale light and silence. Stepping onto the porch revealed damage impossible to miss. The doorframe showed fresh splintering along the latch side. Wood fibers pushed inward, not broken through, as if pressure had been applied repeatedly and then released. The lock held, but only barely. The metal strike plate bent slightly. No other marks appeared on the door. No footprints marked the gravel. Wind would have erased them by dawn anyway. The damage looked deliberate. Not a break-in attempt fueled by panic or rage. The pressure marks sat evenly spaced, consistent with controlled force applied and withdrawn. Testing. The sheriff came out that afternoon. Photos taken. Notes written. A suggestion offered to stay with someone in town for a few nights. The trailer across the flats remained empty. Carl's door stayed locked. The explanation given focused on misidentification, stress, exhaustion. A stranger passing through wearing familiar clothes. A trick of light. A prank taken too far. None of those explanations accounted for the precision of the knock or the timing. None accounted for the doorframe damage without signs of forced entry. Packing took less than an hour. Essentials only. The trailer remained behind with its scars visible on the frame. Leaving felt necessary rather than emotional. Distance mattered more than answers. Later, records from the accident surfaced through a clerk willing to talk. Carl's body had not been intact. Facial reconstruction had been required before release. Someone with access to those details could replicate appearance with enough effort. Someone motivated. A name surfaced weeks later. A transient seen around town asking questions about Carl after the accident. A distant cousin. A man with a history of identity fraud and fixation. He vanished before the sheriff could follow up. The trailer was sold as is. The new owner replaced the doorframe entirely. No further reports came from that location. The desert swallowed the incident the way it always does, leaving only weathered wood and memory behind. The ranch sat alone at the edge of public land where the flats broke into low mesas and pinyon scrub. Western Colorado feels wide in a way that makes distance hard to judge. At night the land goes quiet without ever feeling empty. Wind carries far. Coyotes sound closer than they are. The house had been built in the late 70s, practical and square, with a poured concrete basement that smelled of dust and old paint. The rancher left for a week to help a relative after surgery and asked for someone to keep the place lived in, feed the dogs, and check the water lines. Cell service came and went. A radio sat on the kitchen counter tuned to a local AM station that faded after sunset. The first days passed without incident. Mornings were cold. Frost burned off by 10. The dogs followed at a careful distance and watched every move. The basement held a chest freezer, shelves of canning jars, a workbench, and a spare room with a twin bed. The light down there flickered before settling into a weak yellow. Nothing about it felt unsafe. Just unfinished concrete and the smell of damp soil seeping through the walls. On the third night, sleep came in short bursts. Wind picked up after midnight. The house creaked. The furnace cycled. At some point near one, a sound threaded through the noise, soft and out of place. A A scuff, then another, followed by a slow scrape that carried weight. It came from below, from the direction of the stairs leading down. The dogs did not bark. That made it worse. They stayed quiet in their corner of the living room, eyes open, ears angled toward the floor. The sound repeated. Footfalls would have been easier to place. This was irregular, like fabric dragging or skin sliding across concrete. A thump followed, then a pause long enough to wonder if it had been imagined. The body reacts before the mind finishes weighing options. The flashlight was grabbed from the kitchen drawer. The beam cut a clean white circle through the dark. The basement door opened without resistance. Cold air drifted up. The stairwell smelled sharper than usual, like iron and wet stone. The light at the bottom was off. The switch at the top did nothing. The beam traced the steps. Dust hung in the air and caught the light. The noise came again, closer now, from the far corner near the spare room. Each step down pressed sound into the bones. The beam widened at the bottom and skimmed across shelves, jars, the freezer lid. The corner came into view slowly. A shape sat crouched where the wall met the floor, knees drawn in tight, arms wrapped around them. Skin reflected pale under the light. No clothes. Hair hung in wet strands, dark and tangled, obscuring most of the face. The body shook, a fine tremor that never stopped. Shock flattened thought. The image did not fit any expected category. Trespasser would have been easier. Drunk would have made sense. This did not. The person looked small from that angle, ribs visible, shoulder blades sharp. The beam moved up without conscious direction and settled on the face. The head lifted. The eyes caught the light and flashed back, not glowing but reflecting in a hard way, like an animal caught in headlights on a county road. Pupils blown wide. The gaze did not blink. The reaction came fast. The body unfolded with a speed that bent joints past comfort. There was a dry popping sound from knees and hips, the noise of ligaments protesting. The movement did not read as practiced or graceful. It was frantic and efficient. Hands and feet hit concrete. Nails scraped. The body surged forward and past, brushing close enough to feel heat and damp air. The smell hit then, sharp and sour, unwashed skin, urine, something metallic underneath. The flashlight beam lagged and caught nothing but a pale blur at the edge before the stairwell filled with motion. The sound of climbing came in bursts, hands slapping wood, breath pulled hard through teeth. Then the basement door slammed open and banged against the wall upstairs. Silence returned in a way that pressed on the ears. The dogs exploded into barking and ran toward the stairs. The beam shook. The corner where the figure had been crouched held dark smears on the concrete and a small pile of hair, clumped and cut short, as if hacked off. A trail of damp footprints led toward the stairs, each print narrow, toes splayed. The house above rattled with movement, then the front door slammed. The dog skidded to a stop at the threshold and refused to go farther. The beam stayed trained on the stairs for a long minute, waiting for the sound of return. Nothing came back down. Wind moved through the house. The AM radio hissed static. The instinct to chase died quickly. The place felt compromised. The basement door was pulled shut and wedged with a chair. Locks were checked. The dogs were coaxed into the bedroom. Sleep did not return. Every sound carried intent. Dawn came thin and gray. Morning light changed the basement. The corner showed streaks where skin had rubbed against concrete. Tiny flakes of dried blood dotted the floor near the wall. The spare room bed was stripped bare. The mattress was gone. The frame lay twisted. In the storage closet behind the stairs, the insulation had been torn back. A shallow hollow had been dug into the dirt beneath the foundation, big enough for a body to curl into. The soil was damp and packed smooth by use. Food wrappers lay scattered nearby, jerky packets, cans pried open with teeth. A bucket held water. The place had been occupied for a long time. Outside, tracks cut through frost toward the arroyo and vanished among sage and rocks. Bare feet had left narrow impressions that told a story of constant movement, toes gripping for traction, heels rarely touching. A torn piece of cloth snagged on a fence wire, stained dark. The dogs would not cross the yard. Contacting the rancher took time. Cell service blinked in and out. When the call connected, the explanation landed in pieces. The response on the other end went quiet. Later that afternoon, after a long drive back, the rancher walked the basement without comment, jaw tight. Paperwork came out of a truck folder. A name surfaced, then dates. The previous caretaker had been a distant relative who struggled with addiction and episodes of psychosis. He had been hired cheap and paid in cash. Months before, he stopped answering messages. The assumption had been that he left town. No report filed. No follow-up. The explanation formed slowly as evidence lined up. The caretaker likely brought someone with him, a partner or acquaintance who fell through cracks as easily as he did. When he vanished, the person stayed. Winter set in. Isolation did the rest. Hunger strips layers off behavior. Shame keeps people hidden. The human body adapts to survive in ugly ways. Eyes reflect light when dilated. Joints make noise when abused. Running on all fours is faster when the mind is broken enough to allow it. Law enforcement came later. The basement was photographed. Soil samples were taken. A search followed the tracks until they vanished into rock. No one was found. A missing persons report was filed retroactively. The rancher sealed the basement hollow with concrete and bolted the door. The dog stopped barking at night. Leaving felt necessary. The place did not feel haunted. It felt explained, which carried its own weight. The image stayed sharp for years, not because of fear of the unknown, but because of how ordinary the causes were. Isolation, neglect, the way a person can disappear while still breathing, inches below a floor where someone sleeps. The drive began as a routine favor done late, the kind taken because saying no would have stretched into an argument. A borrowed truck carried feed sacks and a dented cooler, the bed rattling with every shallow rut. The dirt road followed a fence line that had been repaired in pieces over decades, cedar posts leaning at odd angles, wire patched with knots that caught the moonlight. The land there rolled low and wide, grass thinned by drought, soil pale and powdery. No houses stood close. A few yards beyond the fence, the reservation boundary cut across the plain, marked by nothing more than a sign nailed to a post and a change in maintenance. County graders stopped where funding stopped. Tires sank deeper past that line. Headlights cut a narrow tunnel through dust. The truck smelled of oil and hay. Wind hissed through a cracked window, bringing sage and dry manure. Radio reception failed miles back, leaving engine noise and the thump of gravel. Speed stayed low to spare the shocks. Attention drifted to the shape of the road ahead, to the way shadows pooled where the beam weakened. The first shape appeared where the road curved around a shallow wash. At a distance it read as a thin person walking with arms held oddly close, then as something lower and broader. Depth perception on dirt roads plays tricks, especially when dust floats in sheets. Brakes feathered, not yet hard. The shape entered the center of the beam and resolved into a dog, larger than a coyote, ribs faintly visible under a rough coat. What stopped the breath was posture. The animal stood on hind legs, front limbs bent, paws held up as if balancing. The spine looked stiff, tail hanging straight down. Weight shifted with small adjustments that suggested effort. Time stretched thin. The truck rolled forward a few yards. Headlights fixed the scene. The dog did not flinch from the light. Its head turned toward the cab, eyes reflecting yellow, then dark as the angle changed. The mouth moved in a way that belonged to speech rather than panting. Sound carried through the cab that matched a single clear request, shaped by a throat not built for it. The word was not shouted. It was steady, almost calm. Panic arrived without theatrics. Muscles locked, then reacted. Brake pedal hit hard. Tires slid on loose stone. The seatbelt cut into the shoulder. The truck stopped short of the animal. Reverse engaged by feel. The steering wheel shuddered. Dust boiled up, thick and blinding, turning the headlights into white fog. The engine climbed. The truck backed fast, faster than intended, until the road straightened and a darker patch suggested the wash. Through the dust, movement surged. The dog dropped to all fours with a snap of motion that looked practiced, then launched forward. Its run had a hitch, one hind leg swinging wide, but speed closed the distance. The mouth opened beyond a normal yawn, jaw stretching, gums pale. Teeth flashed unevenly, some worn flat, others broken. Breath fogged the beam. The truck fishtailed as reverse speed climbed. The mirror showed a shape keeping pace, paws striking stone, chest low, head high. The sound of claws on gravel cut through the engine noise. The wheels straightened. Forward gear slammed in. The truck lurched and spun dirt, gaining traction. The road ahead narrowed between berms. Dust fell back. The animal stayed in the beam for a few seconds, then dropped out as speed climbed, and the curve took it away. Driving continued without thought for restraint. Hands gripped the wheel until fingers hurt. Eyes stayed locked on the pale ribbon ahead. The fence line blurred past. A culvert flashed by. The sign marking pavement appeared like a rescue flare. Tires hummed as rubber met asphalt. Speed eased only then, breath shaking, chest tight. A gas station stood several miles down, lights harsh and clean. The truck rolled into the lot and idled. The smell of dust and hot brakes filled the cab. The engine clicked as it cooled. Hands shook too much to open the door. The scene replayed without permission, details sharpening instead of fading. Upright posture. The mouth. The sound shaped like a word. Time passed before the drive continued. Home lights came into view at last. The truck parked. The feed sacks stayed where they lay. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak sounded like claws. Dreams tangled with the image of eyes reflecting light. Morning brought a need to explain what had been seen. Coffee went cold while the dashcam card was pulled and slotted into a laptop. The file loaded. Date and time stamped the corner. The road looked familiar through the wide-angle lens, narrower than memory, dust thicker. The shape appeared exactly where recalled. The posture read as odd but less impossible on screen, perspective flattening depth. The dog's hind legs braced against a small mound. Front paws lifted as it leaned forward, making the silhouette look vertical. When the mouth moved, the audio track went dead. Not muted, not lowered, but a flat line for a span of seconds. Engine noise dropped with it, wind gone. Then sound returned as the truck reversed, tires scraping loud. The chase played back with less menace and more physics. The animal ran with a limp, closing some distance but losing ground once speed climbed. No leap at the tailgate. No impact. The mouth opening looked wide, but the angle exaggerated it. The audio remained absent until the truck shifted forward. A closer look at the file properties showed a glitch flagged by the camera software. The microphone had cut out under a spike, likely electrical interference or a loose connector. The same model had forum posts describing brief audio loss during sudden braking. That explanation sat heavy but usable. The rest demanded more work. Upright walking suggested injury or training. Some dogs learned to balance briefly to beg or reach. A mound in the road could lift the torso into a shape that fooled the eye. The word-shaped sound required the most effort to place. Dogs can mimic human sounds with training. Viral videos proved that much. A working dog near a boundary where people lived and trained animals was not impossible. Stress, darkness, and expectation could have filled gaps, turning a bark with a certain cadence into a word. The mouth opening too wide had a mechanical answer. Mange or dehydration can thin the face, pulling skin tight so motion looks extreme. A wide-angle lens stretches edges. Headlights cast upward shadows that deepen the jaw. The chase fit predatory curiosity rather than malice. A startled animal ran after a moving object that retreated, triggered by motion. Once the truck moved forward, interest waned. Pavement, traffic noise, and speed broke the pursuit. A drive back in daylight helped anchor the memory. The wash sat shallow. The mound stood where a grader had dumped dirt. Paw prints marked the soft edges, large and fresh. The fence nearby sagged where a dog could slip through. Beyond it, a cluster of trailers and a barn held kennels. A hand-painted sign warned of dogs on the road. No one was outside. That afternoon, a call to animal control turned up reports of a large dog with a damaged hind leg seen begging near vehicles. A handler had taught it to rear up for treats. It had escaped months back. The mimicry came from time spent around people who rewarded sounds that resembled speech. The boundary meant overlapping jurisdictions, slow responses. The explanation did not erase the fear, but it gave it edges. Memory settled into something that could be carried. The dashcam file stayed saved, the silent seconds a reminder of how machines fail at the worst moments. Driving that road again would always bring a tightening in the chest, but the image now had weight and gravity. A dog, injured and trained badly, met at night where maintenance ended. A brain under stress filled gaps with threat. The road remains the same. Dust still rises. Fences still lean. Headlights still carve tunnels. What changed was the habit of slowing near that wash, of scanning the shoulders, of trusting that fear can be loud and still wrong. The trip had been planned for weeks, timed around a clear stretch of weather and a free weekend. The Mogollon Rim always felt higher than maps suggested. The climb from the desert carried a pressure change that sat in the chest, and the pine air tasted sharp even before the truck door closed behind us. Campsites were scattered along an old forest road, most of them empty because it was already late in the season. The chosen spot sat back from the edge of the escarpment, shielded by ponderosa pines with trunks thick enough to block wind and sight lines. The ground held a mat of needles and compacted dirt, dry and firm, with scattered limestone fragments that glinted pale in the headlamp beams. 2 small tents went up fast. A third was pitched close, the doors facing inward to create a shared pocket of space. A fire burned low and steady, built small to avoid attention. No other lights showed through the trees. Sound carried strangely in that place. Even small movements echoed off the rock wall miles away and came back dull and delayed. Coyotes called once after dark, then fell quiet. The silence afterward felt weighted rather than empty. Dinner was simple and eaten quickly. The temperature dropped faster than expected, the cold settling into hands and knees. Gear was stowed. The fire was drowned and stirred until no glow remained. Headlamps clicked off one by one. The forest returned to its natural state, layered with faint noises that took time to sort. Wind moved through the canopy with a long, steady breath. Needles brushed together overhead. Somewhere downslope, a rock shifted and clattered until it wedged against another stone. Sleep came unevenly. The ground felt harder than remembered. Muscles refused to relax. The mind kept measuring the distance between tents, counting steps, checking for forgotten items. Eventually fatigue pressed down hard enough to blur thought. Awareness thinned to a drifting half-state where time lost shape. A sound cut through it. Not sharp, not sudden, but deliberate. Weight transferred from one surface to another. Something stepped close to the tents, close enough for the ground to respond. The noise carried the density of an upright body rather than the quick pattern of an animal on 4 limbs. Each step arrived with a pause, then another, as if balance was being considered. The rhythm did not match deer or elk. No scraping hooves. No light patter. The soil compressed underfoot. Breathing slowed. Listening took over. The sound moved around the tents, not in a straight line, but in a loose circle that tightened and loosened without reason. Pine needles crunched. A small stone rolled and stopped. The steps came within a few feet of fabric walls, close enough to sense presence through the thin barrier. The air shifted slightly with each pass. Another sound followed. A laugh, brief and imperfect, like air pushed through a throat without intent. It matched the cadence of a laugh that had happened earlier near the fire, the same uneven pattern. A cough came next, dry and shallow, timed to match a cough that had broken the silence minutes before sleep. The imitation carried no emotion. It sounded practiced, assembled from memory rather than produced by impulse. Stillness became absolute. Even breathing felt loud. Fabric rustled once when a sleeping bag shifted, then froze. The steps stopped. Silence stretched until the ears strained to fill it. Then movement resumed, slower now, more cautious. The pacing pattern changed, drifting back and forth along one side of the tents, then crossing behind them. The ground spoke with each transfer of weight. Time lost its markers. Minutes blurred into a long, unbroken stretch of listening. The cold crept in through the ground, rising into joints. Muscles cramped from holding position. Every instinct pressed toward response, toward making a sound to reassert control, but restraint held. The imitation had made its purpose clear. Any noise would be mirrored. Any reaction would be learned. The pacing continued. Sometimes it stopped for long intervals, as if the figure had settled into a crouch or leaned against a tree. At other times it resumed with renewed energy, steps quicker, circling wider, testing the edges of the campsite. Once, the sound of fingers brushing tent fabric came from the outside, light contact that left no visible mark. The pressure was gentle, exploratory. No smell carried through the air. No voice followed the copied sounds. The absence of speech felt intentional, as if language was being avoided. The forest remained still around the campsite. No animals reacted. No birds flushed. The night held its breath along with the occupants of the tents. Eventually the blackness thinned. The sky shifted from absolute dark to a deep blue that hinted at shape. The steps slowed, then stopped entirely. A final weight shift pressed into the ground near the fire ring, then lifted away. Silence returned, complete and unbroken. Dawn arrived without ceremony. Light seeped through branches and settled on the tents, revealing dew along the seams. The cold eased slightly. Stiff limbs moved again. Zippers opened with care. The campsite looked unchanged at first glance. No disturbed gear. No torn fabric. The fire ring sat as it had been left. The ground told a different story. Prints marked the dirt and needles around the tents, forming an uneven ring. Each impression held the outline of a foot shaped like a human's, but stretched. The toes extended farther than normal, narrow and elongated, pressing deeper than the ball of the foot. They pointed inward, angled toward the center of the circle, as if the walker had moved with feet turned toward each other. The stride length suggested a tall person. The depth suggested weight carried without haste. Closer inspection showed irregularities. The heel impressions were shallow compared to the forefoot, indicating careful placement. Some prints overlapped others, tracing the same path again and again. The pattern matched the pacing heard through the night. No tracks led directly into the circle. No clear exit path showed on the compacted ground beyond the campsite. The forest floor outside the ring was rocky and hard, unlikely to hold detail. The prints were photographed from multiple angles with a phone held steady against a pack for scale. Measurements were taken using a trekking pole marked with tape. The longest toe impression measured over 3 inches. The inward angle measured close to 20 degrees. No signs of claws or hooves appeared. No drag marks. No indication of footwear tread. The explanation came together slowly, built from small details rather than a single revelation. A nearby trailhead sat less than a mile away, accessible by a rough spur road. The area was known for occasional transients moving between Forest Service roads, especially before winter closed higher elevations. Some suffered injuries that altered gait. Some wore improvised footwear or none at all. Long toes could result from years of barefoot walking, nails thickened and extended, the foot spreading under constant load. Inward-facing feet could result from old fractures or untreated joint issues. The imitation of sounds could be a learned behavior, a way to test for response without risking confrontation. The avoidance of speech suggested either caution or inability. A search of the immediate area revealed more. A crushed beer can lay wedged between rocks downslope, faded and sun-bleached, likely old. A scrap of fabric hung from a branch farther out, snagged and torn. No fresh campfire remnants appeared nearby, but the ground showed signs of repeated use along a faint path that skirted the campsite at a distance. The path led toward a shallow drainage where water pooled after storms. The decision to leave was unanimous and quick. Tents came down fast. Gear was packed without ceremony. The forest watched in silence. As the truck rolled away, the campsite disappeared behind the trees, returning to stillness. Weeks later, follow-up calls were made. A ranger confirmed reports of a man living intermittently along that stretch of the rim, known to approach camps at night without speaking. He had severe foot deformities from an untreated injury years earlier. He mimicked sounds to gauge whether people were awake, then moved on if no reaction came. No assaults were linked to him, but the behavior had unsettled enough visitors to warrant quiet monitoring. The knowledge brought relief without comfort. The night remained vivid, etched into memory with sensory precision. The weight of those steps, the careful pacing, the deliberate copying of human sounds, all belonged to a person who had learned to navigate the world in a way that blurred the line between observer and threat. The forest had not produced a monster. It had revealed a human presence shaped by isolation, injury, and habit, moving through the dark with methods honed by necessity. Driving west on Highway 160 in March meant long darkness, broken only by reflective paint and the low sweep of sandstone mesas. The road out of Tuba City emptied fast after midnight. That stretch always felt wider than it measured. A straight line pressed through open land with no fences, no lights, and nothing moving except the truck itself. Cold air slid off the high desert and flattened sound. Windows stayed up. Heater ran low. No radio. Silence kept attention sharp. Time mattered on that drive because fatigue crept in quietly. The dash clock showed 2:14 a.m. when the high beams picked up a figure on the shoulder ahead. At first glance, it registered as a hitchhiker or someone whose car had broken down. That part of Arizona sees people walking long distances at night. The brain reached for familiar categories before details settled in. The figure stood close to the white line, facing the road at an angle. Clothing caught the light unevenly. Pants looked thin, loose, pale, like hospital issue or something taken from a laundry bin. No jacket, no shoes, Bare skin showed dull and gray against the asphalt. Speed dropped without thinking, foot easing off the gas while eyes adjusted. Headlights filled in the picture one piece at a time. Arms hung too straight. Shoulders sat high. Hair lay flat against the scalp as if damp or matted down by a cap removed earlier. The face stayed in shadow until the truck drew closer. Feet came into view next. That detail changed everything. Soles did not rest flat on the ground. Weight seemed carried on the balls, heels hovering just enough to look wrong. Ankles flexed at a strained angle, not broken but stressed. Knees bent backward slightly, not dramatically, but enough to register as incorrect. Hyperextension came to mind, something seen in gym injuries or medical videos. Still, the posture held steady, no wobble, no sway. At that distance, the figure turned its head. The motion went too far. Not snapped or jerky, but smooth past the normal stopping point, chin tracking over the shoulder until the profile faced the truck fully, while the body stayed fixed forward. Human necks have limits. This movement crossed them without visible strain. No grimace, no tension, just rotation, controlled and quiet. The road offered no shoulder space to pull off safely. Instinct shifted from caution to escape. The accelerator went down. Engine noise rose. Speed climbed past 70. Side mirror caught the moment the figure dropped. Hands hit pavement. Knees folded under. The body compressed into a low, efficient shape and moved forward with speed that did not match the build. Limbs worked in a pattern closer to sprint drills than a crawl. Head stayed low. Back flattened. The distance closed fast enough to register through the mirror. Adrenaline tightened vision. Peripheral detail vanished. Road lines blurred. Speed hit 80, then more. Tires hummed louder. The truck stayed centered, suspension stiffening as the engine pushed harder. The mirror showed the shape keeping pace for several seconds, arms extending too far, fingers splayed wide, contacting asphalt and lifting again in a rhythm too smooth for panic. At 85 miles per hour, the figure fell back. The shape shrank, then broke apart into shadow and road glare. Nothing followed after that. The mirror showed empty pavement and darkness. The next miles passed in forced focus. Hands stayed firm on the wheel. Breathing slowed deliberately. No turnouts appeared. No oncoming traffic. The highway remained empty, the land flat and unresponsive. Thoughts tried to fill the silence. Fatigue, imagination, poor light, fear layered over unfamiliar posture. Each explanation competed and failed in small ways. Kayenta came up slowly, lights spreading low against the horizon. A gas station stayed open near the junction. Pulling in brought relief mixed with unease. The truck rolled to a stop beside a pump under fluorescent glare. Engine shut off. Silence returned, thinner now, edged with awareness. Stepping out brought cold air and the smell of dust and fuel. The hood radiated heat. That alone meant nothing. Engines run warm after highway speed. What drew attention were the marks. Dust coated the hood from the long drive. Across it lay handprints. Not random smears from earlier checks or routine contact. These prints pressed down clearly, palms elongated, fingers narrow and long. The spacing did not match a normal reach across the hood. Each print angled inward, as if placed deliberately while leaning forward. No scratches, no dents, just pressure marks and dust, too clean to ignore. Closer inspection showed fingertip spacing longer than expected, joints extended fully. The prints aligned near the front edge, consistent with someone bracing against wind or motion. The warmth of the metal suggested recent contact, but that measure stayed unreliable. Shock did not arrive all at once. It spread in layers. First came disbelief, then the attempt to rationalize. Someone else earlier. A mechanic, a passerby. Dust holds prints for days. Heat lingers. The mind stacked explanations, checking each. Inside the station, the restroom's sink reflected a pale face and wide eyes. Water ran. Hands shook slightly, then steadied. Fuel pumped outside. The receipt printed. The drive resumed. The remaining miles passed without incident. Dawn approached by the time the destination appeared. Sleep came late and shallow. Weeks later, answers arrived without drama. A local news report mentioned a man found injured near the highway weeks earlier, several miles east of where the encounter happened. He had escaped from a small medical transport van after a crash on a back road. The report noted severe drug intoxication combined with a rare connective tissue disorder that allowed extreme joint hyperextension. Hospital pants matched the description. Barefoot explained by restraint removal during flight. Further reading filled in gaps. Certain stimulants produce bursts of strength, reduced pain response, and distorted motor patterns. Some individuals adopt quadrupedal movement during extreme agitation, not as an animal mimicry, but as an efficient way to move when balance systems fail. Running on all fours can reach surprising speeds over short distances, especially on smooth surfaces. Nighttime perception exaggerates unfamiliar motion. High beams flatten depth. Stress sharpens some details and warps others. The handprints made sense after a mechanic confirmed something overlooked earlier. During the previous fuel stop before Tuba City, the hood had been opened for a quick fluid check by a roadside helper. Dust preserved the marks. Heat remained from sustained speed. Memory had rearranged sequence under stress, attaching meaning where timing did not support it. The neck rotation, unsettling as it felt, aligned with documented cases of cervical hypermobility. Some individuals can turn far past average range without injury. Seen unexpectedly, under glare and fear, it crossed into something else. The figure running behind the truck stayed the hardest piece to place. Distance estimates at night fail often. A closing shape feels closer than it is. Acceleration creates the illusion of pursuit. The mirror compresses space. A few seconds of movement can feel longer when fear takes control. No report mentioned a chase. No injuries matched being struck by a vehicle. No further sightings occurred. Driving that highway again months later brought nothing unusual. The land stayed quiet. The road stayed empty. Headlights showed only pavement and brush. Memory remained, vivid but anchored now to explanations grounded in biology, chemistry, and human error. Nothing supernatural happened that night. A frightened, injured person crossed paths with a tired driver in the wrong light at the wrong hour. The fear came from the sudden collapse of expectations about how a human body should move. Once that boundary breaks, the mind fills the gap fast. Understanding restored order. The story ended where it began, on a road that stayed indifferent to who passed through, holding no intent beyond distance and time. Lambing season pushed everyone to the edge of exhaustion, and that exhaustion was the reason for staying alone in the sheep camp trailer instead of driving back to the house each night. The trailer sat in a shallow draw a mile from the main barn, parked where the range opened into broken sage and low hills. Aluminum walls, thin as a soda can, reflected moonlight and every sound. The place smelled of wool, dust, diesel, and the faint sourness of old coffee soaked into the counter. Wind had polished the ground bare around the tires, leaving hard dirt packed smooth by years of boots and hooves. The workdays started before light and ended well after dark. That night ended later than usual. You had struggled, then another, and by the time hands were washed and coveralls peeled off, the sky had gone black and the moon hung low and sharp. The trailer heater clicked and hummed without warmth. A small propane lamp glowed on the counter, turned low to save fuel. The only other light came from the moon through the narrow window over the bed. Sleep never comes easy during lambing. The body stays wired, listening for sounds that mean trouble. Around 11:30 p.m., that listening turned into something sharper. Footsteps moved outside. Not the random scuff of wind-blown debris. Not the skitter of a rabbit. The steps had weight. They followed the curve of the trailer, slow and deliberate, heel to toe, a steady pace that suggested someone taking care where to place each foot. The sound traveled from the hitch end, along the narrow side, toward the door. Gravel shifted once, then dirt. A boot heel tapped the metal step and lifted away. Breathing slowed to a shallow rhythm without meaning to. The hand that reached for the knife did not shake. That blade stayed under the pillow every night out there. The habit came from growing up in country, where help stayed far away, and noise at night usually meant an animal testing its luck. The steps continued past the door and around the back. The propane lamp was turned lower, then off. Darkness filled the trailer. Moonlight traced a thin line along the floor where the door met the frame. The aluminum walls creaked as the temperature dropped. Outside, the steps paused. A voice came next. The sound carried clearly through the thin wall, low and familiar, calling a name that had not been spoken by that voice in 3 years. The tone held the same flat drawl remembered from childhood, the same way of dragging the last syllable as if patience ran thin. That voice belonged to an uncle who had died in a rollover on a county road, crushed metal and broken glass, ending a life that had seemed solid and unmovable. Memory flooded hard and fast. Long days mending fence. The smell of sweat and leather. A hand clapped on a shoulder with enough force to leave a sting. The voice came again, closer now, right outside the wall near the bed. The sound pressed through aluminum as if the speaker leaned in, mouth inches from the metal. Stories from childhood surfaced without warning. Old rules passed down without explanation. If it calls you, don't answer. Those words carried weight even after years of laughing them off. The knife handle felt warm in the hand. Muscles locked tight, holding breath until lungs burned. The steps shifted. Something brushed the wall. Fingertips, nails, or a stick dragged once, testing the surface. Then the door scratched. Just once. Not hard enough to dent the metal, not loud enough to wake sheep, but deliberate enough to leave no doubt. The sound cut through the dark and settled deep. Time stretched. The mind tried to build reasons. A tired ranch hand playing a cruel joke. Wind carrying a voice from far away. Memory replaying tricks. None of it fit the precision of the sounds. No laughter followed. No footsteps retreated. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. The night dragged forward inch by inch. The propane heater cycled, a soft click followed by a hiss, then nothing. Cold seeped in through the floor. The moon slid behind a cloud, plunging the trailer into complete darkness. Eyes stayed fixed on the door seam, waiting for movement that never came. Outside, the sheep shifted and snorted now and then, the normal sounds of a flock settling. No more steps circled the trailer. Sleep never arrived. Muscles stayed coiled ready. Thoughts moved in slow loops, counting breaths, measuring minutes by the faint change in cold. At some point the moon returned, casting pale light through the window. The knife never left the grip. When dawn finally bled into the sky, relief came with it, thin and fragile. Morning light revealed frost on the sage, and a sky washed clean. The door opened with a squeal of dry hinges. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp smell of sheep and earth. The ground around the trailer told a story that made the stomach tighten. Tracks circled the trailer. Clear prints pressed into the dirt, easy to read in the low-angle light. They started as coyote tracks, narrow and neat, pads and claws marked cleanly. The trail followed the same path heard the night before, a slow circle around the trailer. Then the tracks changed. The pads stretched. Claws disappeared. Toes appeared, 5 of them, spreading as weight shifted. The trail ended in barefoot human prints, heels and arches clear, toes splayed slightly outward. Those prints stopped near the door. The prints did not leave. They did not lead away toward the hills or the barn. They simply stopped, as if the person stood there for a long time and then vanished into air. Work could not wait. Lambs cried for attention. The flock needed checking. The tracks were photographed with a phone, angles and close-ups taken despite hands shaking. By mid-morning, the sun softened the dirt and the edges of the prints blurred. By noon, the ground held nothing but scuffed earth. That afternoon, the situation was laid out in a calm voice to the friend who owned the place. No emotion, just facts. Footsteps. A voice. Tracks. The friend listened, eyes narrowing, jaw set. No jokes followed. Instead, a long silence stretched between words. The explanation came slowly, pieced together from knowledge of the land and the people who worked it. Coyotes ran those draws every night, bold during lambing, testing fences and nerves. A single coyote could circle a trailer out of curiosity or hunger. The coyote tracks made sense. The voice did not. The barefoot prints did not. A seasonal hand had quit that morning without notice. The man had arrived 2 weeks earlier, quiet and thin, with a habit of watching more than speaking. He slept in his truck on the far side of the property, claiming the trailer bunks felt too closed in. The friend mentioned the man's past in passing, a record that included trespassing, animal cruelty, and a charge involving harassment that never stuck. The man had grown up in the same county. He knew families. He knew names. He knew voices from local gatherings and funerals. The theory took shape with disturbing clarity. The man likely followed the coyote trail, stepping into the tracks to mask his own. Bare feet explained the change, skin flattening dirt where pads once pressed. The voice could be imitation, practiced and careful, shaped to carry through metal and darkness. The scratching on the door fit a test, a probe to see if fear would draw a response. The rule about not answering existed for a reason. Predators of any kind look for engagement. The man's truck was found later that day parked near a county road, bed empty, cab stripped of personal items. No sign pointed to where he went next. A call to the sheriff produced a brief visit and a report that went nowhere. Without direct evidence, the explanation stayed a theory. It fit too well to ignore. That night was spent in the house, walls thick and lights bright. Sleep came in short bursts. The next days brought more information. A neighboring ranch reported a man trying doors after midnight, barefoot, smelling of sweat and dust. Another place found boot prints near a lamb pen, paired with coyote tracks that suddenly turned human. The pattern repeated until reports stopped. The land returned to its usual rhythms. Lambs grew stronger. Coyotes stayed wary. The trailer sat empty for the rest of the season, door locked, windows shuttered. Tracks never appeared again. Looking back, the fear came not from something unknown, but from something understood too late. A tired mind in a vulnerable place, thin walls and darker intentions meeting at the worst hour. The voice had power because it belonged to memory, because it reached into trust and twisted it. The tracks told the truth once daylight stripped away the night's confusion. The rule held because it worked. Silence denied what the intruder wanted. Morning exposed the rest. The knife went back under the pillow for every night spent out there afterward, not because of ghosts or legends, but because people learn how to hide behind them. Bow season had been quiet that week, the kind of quiet that settles into the bones and makes every step sound louder than it should. The land sat high and folded, timber broken by old logging cuts and narrow benches where deer moved at dusk. That afternoon dragged longer than expected. A mature buck crossed late, quartering away at the edge of shooting light, and the arrow struck clean. The animal ran hard downhill and piled up in a draw thick with alder and blowdown. Field work took time. The light thinned faster than planned. By the time the first quarter was bagged and lashed, the sky had turned the dull blue that comes before full dark. The pack felt heavier than usual. Not just the meat, but the air itself. The woods carried that late-season smell of wet bark, cold soil, and leaf mold. Wind stayed down. Nothing moved except the slow drift of fog lifting from the creek below. Headlamps stayed off to preserve night vision, relying on the last gray light filtering through bare branches. The truck waited nearly a mile away, parked on an old spur road choked with grass and ruts. Progress stayed steady until the slope eased and the trees opened into a thin stand of aspen. Time checked out of habit. Around 6:40 p.m. darkness was close. The pack straps creaked. Breath sounded loud inside the hood. Then a sound cut through the timber that stopped everything mid-step. A deer screamed. Not the sharp bark of an alarm snort. Not the bleat of a fawn. This noise dragged out, high and broken, wrong in pitch and rhythm. It wavered like someone unsure how a deer should sound, stretching the call too long, missing the natural cadence. The scream came again closer, then cut off as if swallowed. The woods went still in a way that felt deliberate. Listening took over. Muscles locked. Ears strained toward the trees on the left where the ground dropped into thick fur and shadow. No movement followed. No hoofbeats. No crashing brush. The scream returned once more, lower this time, strained, followed by something else layered underneath. Breath, maybe. A wet sound that did not belong to an animal at full strength. The pack straps were eased tighter. The bow shifted in hand. Steps resumed with care, angling toward the road faster than planned. The next sound did not belong to any animal known to the area. A voice carried from the trees. Just one word. A name. The name belonged to the person carrying the pack. The sound came from the same stand of fur, from shoulder height, not ground level. The tone matched someone familiar, someone heard since childhood. The voice sounded like a brother's voice stripped of warmth. Flat, measured, as if spoken through clenched teeth, or played through a cheap speaker without depth. No emotion rode it. No inflection. The woods swallowed the sound after it left the mouth that formed it. Every instinct screamed to run, but movement stayed controlled. Breath slowed. The road lay less than 200 yards ahead. The trees thinned. The sky faded to charcoal. Gravel appeared under boots. The truck waited alone, tailgate facing the timber, dust still clinging to the sides from the drive-in. Keys came out without fumbling. The pack dropped into the bed. The door opened and closed in one motion. Locks clicked. The engine turned over. Headlights cut through the dark and carved long beams between trunks. Something slammed into the side of the truck. The impact came from the rear quarter, hard enough to rock the entire vehicle on its suspension. Metal groaned. The steering wheel jolted. The sound carried weight and intent, not the hollow thud of a falling branch or rolling rock. The truck lurched as if shoved. Headlights stayed fixed forward. Hands tightened on the wheel. The engine revved. Tires spun on loose gravel before catching. The truck surged ahead down the spur road, branches scraping the sides, mirrors clipped by brush. No shape appeared in the beams. Nothing followed into the open stretch beyond the trees. The drive-out blurred into muscle memory. The gate stood open as left earlier that afternoon. The county road appeared empty. Miles passed before breathing slowed enough to feel air again. The cab smelled like iron and cold sweat. The radio stayed off. The mirrors were checked until the road bent away from the timber, and the lights of town began to show through the trees. Sleep did not come that night. The image of the truck rocking replayed with every blink. The sound of that voice played over and over, stripped of expression, hollowed out, wrong in ways difficult to name. The thought of a deer making that first scream came back again and again. Deer did scream when hurt badly, but not like that. Not in that rhythm. Not followed by a human voice shaped so precisely. Morning light brought clarity and weight at the same time. The truck sat in the driveway, dried mud on the tires, a smear of blood along the tailgate where the pack had rested. The side panel where the impact landed held long scratches torn through dust and into paint. 5 distinct lines ran parallel, deep enough to expose bare metal. The spacing matched a human hand spread wide. Not 4 marks from hooves or claws. 5. Each line varied in depth, as if pressure shifted during the strike. Closer inspection showed flecks of dark material embedded in the grooves. Rubber. Tiny curls of black caught along the edges. The marks angled slightly downward, consistent with a hand sliding as it struck, not a swipe from an animal moving at speed. The height of the scratches sat just above the wheel well, right where a person standing close could reach. The ground beside the truck told the rest. Boot prints pressed into the damp gravel, larger than average, toes pointed toward the tailgate. The tread pattern stood out clean and sharp, not worn smooth by long use. Another set overlapped, stepping back toward the trees. No drag marks. No sign of a body thrown by momentum. The prints circled once, then headed into the brush where the road narrowed. Backtracking a short distance into the timber revealed more. Broken twigs snapped at shoulder height. A scrap of camouflage fabric snagged on a thorn, torn clean, the edge fresh. The pattern matched cheap gear sold at local farm stores, not the kind worn by careful hunters. A crushed aluminum can lay near the base of a fur, still cold to the touch. The brand sold energy drinks popular with younger guys who spent more time on social media than in the woods. The scream made sense then. Deer in distress made terrible sounds, but someone had tried to push it further, stretching the noise into something meant to freeze a person in place. Predator callers could mimic almost anything. Cheap electronic models played recorded sounds through tinny speakers. Some even allowed custom uploads. The voice followed the same logic. A name spoken without feeling, stripped of the small cues that made it human. A recording played back through a handheld speaker, close enough to carry through the trees, flat enough to sound wrong. The brother's voice came from old messages saved without permission. Social media left trails for anyone patient enough to follow. Family photos, tagged posts, names spoken casually in videos. A stranger could collect them all without ever being noticed. The timing fit. Bow season drew people who hunted ethically, but it also drew others who did not. Poachers worked dusk and dawn, using distress calls to pull deer from cover. Some went further, learning patterns of solo hunters, watching trailheads, noting license plates. Meat carried out alone made an easy target. Fear slowed people down. Confusion caused mistakes. The impact against the truck came from frustration. A person expecting a panicked reaction met a locked door and an engine instead. The hand struck metal hard, gloved fingers reinforced with rubber grips or cheap knuckle guards, leaving marks shaped by human anatomy. The rubber residue lined up with the gloves found later discarded near a culvert along the road out, black and torn, the palms studded with raised traction dots. A report filed with conservation officers tied the pieces together. Other hunters had heard similar screams in nearby units. One found boot prints circling a blind. Another discovered a trail camera stolen, later recovered smashed along a logging road. The pattern pointed to a small group working the area, using intimidation to push hunters out and claim ground without witnesses. The woods returned to normal after that. Deer moved again at dusk. The quiet settled back into its usual shape. The scratches on the truck stayed, paint chipped and metal scarred, a reminder fixed in place. Each mark traced a finger that did not belong to any animal meant to be there. The memory of a voice carried through trees stayed sharper than the sound itself. Not because it hinted at something beyond reason, but because it proved how easily reason could be turned against someone alone in the dark.